Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. So some action yesterday in the Kohlberger case, the Idaho 4 case. And one of the decisions is that Judge Hippler has made a decision that Kohlberger's family will be allowed in the courtroom during the trial, and not just to testify, but to actually observe the proceedings. And we'll go into this a little bit more, but that was a ruling that Judge Hippler made that has sided with the defense in this case. He's been criticized by many as being a pro-prosecution judge. I don't think of him as that. However, many people have framed him as that, as a pro-prosecution judge. He's made a lot of decisions, and I believe that his decisions are made based upon the law, case law, and precedent. These are a picture of Brian Kohlberger's two sisters, and of course this famous picture of he and his father driving back to Pennsylvania from Washington State University prior to his arrest. So his family members are going to, of course, be in the courtroom when the trial starts in August. An uncomfortability factor for the victims' families, absolutely, who have to sit in the courtroom, not only with the defendant, but of course with the family of the defendant. A little bit, I would think, uncomfortable. But that's what was ruled yesterday, and we'll get into what else was ruled on yesterday. So, folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your service dog, hold on to your cup of coffee. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off-the-cuff zone, the police off-the-cuff zone.
There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. It's baseball season's in full swing, and we're into the NBA and NHL playoffs. And BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, and scores. Even live in-game betting while the games are being played. With the largest selection of odds on everything from Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, and UFC, BetOnline remains the best online source for all your sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. So this ruling yesterday, of course, was, not totally unexpected. Brian Kohlberger's immediate family members will be allowed to attend his upcoming quadruple murder trial in the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students, even if they might be called to testify, a judge ruled in an order made public Thursday. The order followed a previous court filing from prosecutors, which included a list of the family members they intended to call and explanations as to why each of those people should be kept out of the courtroom. After reviewing the list, Judge Stephen Hippler said Kohlberger's immediate family would not be included in that group. Having considered the state's response, the court, exercising its discretion, finds good cause to excuse defendant's immediate family, for example, parents and siblings, from the anticipated exclusion order, Hippler wrote in this week's decision. Witnesses in criminal cases are sometimes excluded from attending trials to prevent them from shaping their testimony in response to what other witnesses have said or what evidence has been presented. But Hippler wrote that Kohlberger's Sixth Amendment right to a public trial also entitles him to have his parents and siblings present if they want to attend. Courts recognize that having defendant's family members present at trial advances the values served by the right to a public trial. For example, ensuring fair proceedings, reminding the prosecutor and judge of their grave responsibilities, discouraging perjury, and encouraging witnesses to come forward. This was written by Judge Hippler, of course, and this was a report based on a report from CBS News. So the family will be allowed in the courtroom, and they will be allowed to observe. And we don't know exactly who will be getting called as a witness. I would imagine that Brian Kohlberger's father would be called. You see on the screen his two sisters, unknown if they will be called, but the judge has ruled that they will absolutely be allowed in the courtroom. So Judge Stephen Hippler made his ruling yesterday, and I don't know if this was a great surprise to anyone, but I think it's a fair ruling. There's a lots of consideration, and of course, one of the considerations we previously mentioned was someone that could tailor their testimony to what they've heard from other witnesses. This is from a local news, Channel 7.
Good evening. I'm Hunter Funk. And I'm Morgan Romero. New at 6, the family of the man accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho students will be allowed in the courtroom throughout his entire trial. Today, Ada County Judge Stephen Hippler allowed Brian Kohberger's immediate family to be in the courtroom before and after they testify as witnesses in the trial. In another order released today, Hippler allowed the prosecution's expert to do a mental health examination on Kohberger and gave them a little bit more time to do so. This comes after defense experts disclosed information about Kohberger's mental conditions, including ADHD, autism, and OCD. Kohberger's trial will begin here in Ada County on August 11th.
And coming up on Friday, Dateline will air a 2-hour special looking into the case that has captivated the country since that tragic night more than 2 years ago. The special will reveal exclusive new details that have never been reported before, including video, photographic, and digital evidence that investigators say track Kohberger's movements. It'll also include interviews with friends of victims and former students who open up for the first time about their interactions with the accused killer.
So there has been so much coverage on this case, as we all know. In fact, I probably, I don't know the exact number, but I've probably done about 100 videos on this case. I'd have to check that number. But there has been a great deal of coverage, not just from content creators on YouTube, but the mainstream media, the big, CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, all of these stations. News Nation, of course, has covered this right from the very beginning. And it is quite an intriguing case. I mean, there are so many aspects to this case that has piqued people's interest. The aspects of the potential, the PhD student who researched this case in order to try to get away with it, that he had reconned the location, actually planned it and traveled back and forth and reconned the house. And what's still baffling to so many is that everyone wants to know what was the motive. But right now, that is unclear. And we did a show just the other night on what the motive is. And there are writers out there insisting that they know what the motive is, and they clearly do not. But everyone wants to know, will the prosecution present a motive? They don't have to. So if they don't have one, they're not going to make up one, as so many of these writers and news reporters insist they need to make up a motive, because if it doesn't fit, just make it fit, make it fit, invent something, which I think is terribly dishonest. But let's not act like it hasn't happened before, that so many people want to know what the motive. And in fact, there's a writer, and we did a show about him the other night, or not about him, but we mentioned him, that many mainstream media stations put him on as like a homicide expert, and he's anything but. And he's one that is inventing a motive. And he pulls it back and says, oh, it's just a hypothesis. Okay, it's a hypothesis. Isn't a hypothesis an educated guess? So if you're not educated on homicide and the investigation of such, how is your hypothesis mean anything? Anyway, this is Banfield talking about the family testifying in the courtroom and being in the courtroom.
It has been a long and lonely 2.5 years for Brian Kohberger. Locked away in a maximum security jail cell, segregated from the other prisoners, thousands of miles away from his parents in Pennsylvania. They can't exactly pop in for moral support when the mood strikes. But their moods may just be a little brighter tonight after a ruling from Kohberger's trial judge in Boise. Our Brian Entin was there and jumped on a plane to come back. He's fresh off the plane in New York. I'm so glad I caught you. You're at the airport. What did you learn in that hearing?
Yeah, sorry if I look a little greasy, actually. It's been a long day of flying. But basically, these rulings came down today. We've been waiting to find out if Brian Kohberger's parents and sisters were going to be allowed inside the courtroom during the 3-month trial. And the judge decided today that, yes, they are going to allow them to be there. The prosecution was concerned because they are expected to be witnesses at some point during the trial. But the judge decided it was Brian Kohberger's constitutional right to have his family there, to have his sisters there if they want to come, and that they could be there throughout the entire trial, Ashley.
That's going to be super awkward if you think about it, right? Because you've got a courtroom is always bifurcated. Usually behind the prosecutors are all the victims' supporters, family members, et cetera. And then behind the defense, obviously, are the friends of the defendant. But I don't know anybody who has spoken out in his favor. I don't know anybody other than very odd people online who just think what they think. But that would be it. That'd be just the family facing down families of 4 kids on the other side.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the trial. I mean, I don't know if the Kohberger family is going to come right in through the front of the courthouse, and the families of the victims maybe will be escorted in through like a side or back entrance. But yeah, it's going to be logistically, I think, sort of an interesting 3 months. And also just to see what they're there to testify about. We don't know totally for sure. I have some theories. I mean, you remember the prosecution has said that Kohberger bought the knife off of Amazon. Was it a family Amazon account? Do they need to bring up the parents to say, hey, are you the ones who ordered the knife? I think that could be one possibility.
Yeah, and I should explain that what's key here in this ruling is that when you're a witness in a trial, you can't sit in the courtroom and listen to the whole trial and then, have your testimony affected by all the other people you've heard testify. So that's why this is such a big deal, that the family members are likely to be witnesses, but they are also family. So it's the same goal.
I wonder, and Ashley Banfield brought up a good point there. Like, I wonder if because of that, of the family potentially having their testimony affected by hearing all of the other testimony, I wonder if then the prosecution or the defense will call them up very early in the case so they get their testimony over with, so they won't be affected by testimony that comes after them. That could be a possibility, and that could be the judge meeting with both the prosecution and the defense to have that actually happens. That would be a way that they could get rid of that prejudice of having the family members hear others' testimony and then possibly be influenced by testimony of others.
For the victims and those family members, if they're going to be witnesses, they also want to be able to be in that courtroom, to be there for their loved one who's not there. So it's just always a very tense and tender kind of decision that has to be made. Can you just briefly tell me about the closed door hearing on Monday? We were all playing parlor games trying to figure out what it was about, and I think we know now.
Yeah, there was a lot of speculation. People thought that it was a plea deal, which we knew it wasn't happening because it was just a remote hearing. It turns out it was the prosecution asking to have their own mental health evaluation done on Brian Kohberger. Remember, the defense has had experts talk about his mental health and the conditions he has, but now the judge has agreed that the prosecution can do that. So there's going to be another mental health evaluation. They said the lawyers can't be there for it, but they can watch by video. When that's going to happen, we don't know at this point.
You're based on the East Coast. I'm just loving the vibe of seeing the airport behind you, but this is going to be a lot of cross-country travel for you because you're going to be taking this flight, if not others, from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. Brian, thank you for this and get a really good sleep tonight. It's been a long journey for you today.
Yeah, thanks, Ash.
And I recommend the Uber or the Lyft because the taxi line is always really long.
So that was the big decisions yesterday. Was that Judge Hippler would rule that the family, of course, would be allowed to be in the courtroom during the trial, even though they are witnesses. A little bit bizarre, but as I previously stated, one of the ways to accomplish that and have the least amount of exposure or prejudice from having witnesses hear other witnesses' testimony is to have them testify very early in the trial. In the next few weeks, also there is going to be they're going to be picking a jury.
This summer, Fox 13 has just learned of a closed-door remote hearing held late this morning, and it was scheduled by the judge in this case. We are closely monitoring for any new updates.
Meanwhile, both sides are now focusing on that all-important jury selection. Fox 13's Shira Matsuzawa talked with legal experts about what the defense and the state will likely be on the lookout for.
Well, one expert tells me once that trial starts, those jurors will be the most important people in the courtroom. So they've likely got consultants and have already done mock trials to test how potential jurors will respond to their case.
It's your civic responsibility serving on a jury.
One of the best things about America is our jury system.
And while it's unknown who will serve on the jury for Brian KOHBERGER'S trial, both sides are gearing up for the jury selection process.
For me, it's like my favorite part of a case because I get a really good sense of who I'll be together with, for the ensuing weeks or months.
Attorney Ann Bremner says before potential jurors set foot into the courthouse, they'll likely fill out a lengthy questionnaire, asking them their views on law enforcement, the death penalty, and if they've ever heard of Brian KOHBERGER. From there, attorneys can question the prospective jurors in a process known as voir dire.
And then you start looking at two things. One is indoctrination and the other is kind of exploration. And indoctrination during a jury selection is to try and hit your themes as you talk to jurors, like whatever the themes are for each side, to say, do you agree with this idea? How do you feel about this or that? To try and get people kind of going your way a little bit then. And a lot of judges won't allow that, but that's something you try to do.
Dr. Andrea Blunt-Hunter is a trial consultant with Mind Matters Jury Consulting. She says they're not looking for a juror who has never heard of KOHBERGER and how he's accused of murdering University of Idaho students Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kronodal, because that could be difficult considering the media exposure this case has received. But rather, they're looking for a person in the middle.
Those who've heard about it, but understands there's always two sides to a story. And the best case for the defense is just to find someone who's willing to hear their story.
One thing I do in a high-profile case, I ask the juror to write everything they've heard about the case. Because if they write down everything they've heard about the case, they're kind of telling me what they think about the case, right?
Both sides are also paying attention to demographics as well as personalities.
Each side will be looking for different relationships people have to authority. For example, the prosecution would want law and order advocates on their side, and there's probably a lot of them in Boise, Idaho. So the defense has a tougher challenge.
She says KOHBERGER'S attorneys will be looking for people who are more skeptical and don't accept things at first glance. There's also another challenge.
One of the dark horses that both sides are afraid of is the juror who really wants to be on this jury.
And she says no one wants that person to slip through because it could lead to a mistrial.
The attorneys will also need to find out if a potential juror has been a victim of a crime before and if they could be susceptible to being traumatized during this trial, because there will likely be difficult crime scene photos and details that come out of it. Jury selection is expected to begin on July 30th, the trial on August 11th.
So very, very interesting. When you think about it, one of the big decisions that was made early in this case was made by Judge John Judge from Latah County, who granted a change of venue. Remember that? It seems so long ago. So this case is not taking place where the crime took place in Latah County in Moscow, Idaho. Rather, it's taking place in Boise. So right there, there's a whole different different look at this case, because it's the jury pool will be from Boise, Idaho, and not from Latah County. So the defense, I'm sure, was thrilled with that, but was the prosecution. But to bend over backwards to be fair, I think that that's probably a good thing. The other thing is, yesterday they were making a great deal of that Judge Hippler ruled that the prosecution could have their experts examine Brian Kohberger to see if he had autism, if his mental state of mind, because the defense is, because this is, of course, a death penalty case, the defense already had that, and they have their experts to say he has autism spectrum disorder, he's got ADHD, he's got some other mental health issues. So the prosecution is going to be allowed to have their experts examine Brian Kohberger, and these experts can testify during this trial as to what their findings were. And I always get a kick out of the fact that sometimes the defense experts and the prosecution experts are 360 degrees opposed in opinion when they give their opinion on a defendant. It's unbelievable, right? And what does that tell you? I don't know. I'm not going to draw any conclusions from it, but it is sort of curious that that always occurs, and that the defendant's experts and the prosecution experts always are far apart in their opinions. Also, we spoke a little about what was the motive, and everyone's still making a big deal out of this, the motive.
Very helpful to a case, but not mandatory. Prosecutors convict murder suspects all the time without knowing why the killer did it. And for more than 2 years now, it has looked like the quadruple murders at the University of Idaho may be another case in point. For all the evidence that we've seen in court papers so far, evidence that points to a suspect with the means and the opportunity to commit this horrendous crime, we've seen next to nothing about a motive, an alleged reason as to why Brian Kohberger, who's charged with this, would want those 4 innocent kids dead in such a violent and bloody way. But now, with Kohberger's trial just 3 months away, there is one reporter who says he thinks he knows what prosecutors are planning to present in the way of motive. His name is Howard Bloom, and his article appears in an online newsletter called Airmail. In it, Bloom suggests that prosecutors think Kohberger went to monstrous and unthinkable extremes to impress a woman. And not just any woman, a woman you have seen on this program many times, Catherine Ramsland. Dr. Ramsland was one of Kohberger's professors back at DeSales University in Pennsylvania. When Brian Kohberger earned a master's degree in criminal justice, it was at DeSales. Ramsland teaches forensic psychology and has written more than 50 books. According to the article, prosecutors are preparing to tell the jury, and I quote, "The pupil was ready to become the teacher. He'd kill and get away with it. He'd prove how smart he was. He would show how much he'd learned." The article also suggests that Dr. Ramsland and Kohberger stayed in touch after he left DeSales University and moved out west, that they emailed each other after the murders, and that Ramsland called Kohberger's mother after he was arrested. So what does Dr. Ramsland say about the story and all the details contained within it? Not quite. That's my summary. I'm joined now by my...
So, we reported on that yesterday, the night before. And Howard Bloom is an excellent writer, but not an expert on homicide investigation, not an expert on serial killers, not an expert on the psychology, not an expert on what motive is. So a lot of the things that he wrote turned out to be challenged by Dr. Ramsland and not to be true. And then it seemed that Howard Bloom pulled it back and said, oh, I really didn't mean that. I mean, this is a hypothesis. All of a sudden he pulled it there. I find that curious, especially when you're selling, these articles in this Airmail magazine, and Howard Bloom previously finished a book on this topic. So we just thought we would mention that too. So the case is getting closer and closer. We're going to see a lot more coverage. I think Friday night, there's a big 2-hour coverage by NBC on this. So stay tuned to it. So folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. We'll bring you the newest things coming up with this case as they move along. The big secret meeting yesterday was for allowing the prosecution to get their own experts to examine Kohberger. So we'll bring you the news as we get it. I'm Bill Cannon from Police Off the Cuff. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day, everyone, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.